I want to thank Dr. Jerry Jo Gillum for that warm welcome and also that introduction, and also for Jenny Shanahan for inviting me to give this talk here this evening. It was something of a surprise, I think, for me, and especially, I think, even also for her to see so many of you come. There's a great interest in this subject right now because it is something that's weighing on the hearts of a lot of us in this country at this time that are Catholic. But not only us as Catholics, but I think all of any religious persuasion, because of what's happening as this administration is pushing forward. One of the things that I would like to do this evening, I've always heard that a good talk tells you what he's going to, the speaker tells you what he's going to do, he does it, and then he tells you what he's done. So I would like to try to follow that. I'm going to talk primarily about conscience tonight, and what exactly is it about our claim to violation of conscience that is so significant here. There are other issues that could be addressed, like the freedom, liberty. There's also the issue of contraception, sterilization, abortion, and the evil nature of those acts. There's several ways that could have been taken here this evening, but the one I'm going to take is the area of conscience and what conscience is within the Catholic understanding of it, and also hopefully to then appreciate why we would call this particular mandate a violation of conscience and what it means for us. I'd like to start, first of all, by contextualizing the debate, and I'm going to start with a quote from the former Majority Leader of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and she has been in the forefront of a great deal of debate relative to Obamacare, and once again came forward in this particular debate on the mandate from the Health and Human Services sector of Obama's administration. Let me just quote to you from her. She says here, Pelosi says, the position is akin to having hospitals say to a woman, now I'm quoting, "I'm sorry, you could die if you don't get an abortion." This is what she told the Washington Post. Then she continues, "Those who dispute that characterization may not like the language, but the truth is what I said. I'm a devout Catholic, and I honor my faith and love it. But they have this conscience thing that insists put women at physical risk, although Catholic providers strongly disagree." And she's specifically talking there about the bishops and attempting to polarize the bishops from Catholic healthcare providers and the faithful at large, as it is, politicizing this. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to appreciate here, that when the Catholic bishops teach us, it is very different than when the government legislates and requires laws to be followed. The object of the laws that we receive from the government is our will. This is the nature of law. Law, for example, would require us, when we see a stop sign, to stop. The stop sign is not there to signify, this is optional, if you want to stop, please do, but if you don't and you're in a hurry, go right through. It's aimed at our will. The law is aimed at our will and trying to elicit its desired behavior from us. Now, all of us would admit there's validity to law. Stop signs, yield signs, speed signs in zones where there's children, all of this makes good, rational sense. But see, the object of the Magisterium, the bishops, of which Nancy Pelosi is speaking here, is different. The object of the Magisterium, when it's teaching us, is not simply an imposition upon the will, they are appealing to our intellect, to our capacity to reason, to our capacity to understand, you see. And so when Nancy Pelosi would say that they have this conscience thing, she's interpreting that as being the magisterium addressing the will of the people to require that women die instead of having an abortion. I mean, it's just, it's a crazy caricature, and yet at the same time, she has the object of the magisterium's instruction mistaken as well. The magisterium does not operate like a branch of the U.S. government, which puts out laws, and many of them make a lot of sense, and most of us, I'm sure, are grateful for those laws. But when the church teaches, she is not attempting to impose anything, as much as to persuade, as much as to help us understand our teaching in such a way that this really makes sense too. And then we freely embrace it. Now, I think the other thing that we have to appreciate is the world in which, and I'm not really picking on Nancy Pelosi, she's representative of government and law, which has legitimacy within the society, promulgating laws, but law is very different than what the magisterium is about helping us understand when it teaches us. These are not the same thing when they're talking to us. When the bishops speak to us, it's not the same thing as when our government speaks to us. When the government speaks to us, what we really have here is a case, again, of addressing the will, but not only that, law of its very nature structures to the minimum. That's its nature. You can't legislate someone to, for example, heroic virtue. I can't require you under mandate to go and kill yourself. I can't do that. I can't mandate that. In this country, for example, we no longer have the draft, I think in part because of that, and I think that was a good call. Our men who are in the military, our women who are in the military, freely enlist and are willing to lay down their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy, and I think we rightly esteem them and thank them, all right? But to require and mandate that kind of sacrifice, we had in the 60s and the 70s at least many who were running off, and conscientious objection, which is one way of doing it, but also outright resistors to the draft who didn't want to go off and do that. And there's something right about that. But see, when the magisterium is teaching us, they are teaching us about a way of life which is really calling us to higher ground than the minimum. You see, we are called upon. Jesus gave us the commandment to love one another. Now, that's a tall order. But it isn't like he just gives it to us without giving us the aid, the possibility, the means to fulfill it at the same time. See, this is a higher calling than simply the minimum that all of us are bound to by law, which is why law will never save you. If the law is your code of life, and especially if it's your code of moral life, you are going to structure your life to the minimum and possibly even get into a position that when you come to that stop sign, you'll stop if there's a police officer there, but you won't even do the minimum if you can get away with it. You see, it gets lower and lower and lower. But see, that's not the way our bishops approach us. They are teachers of Christ. They are successors of the apostles, and they're talking to us about a much higher order of law in the order of love. And the order of love, as Jesus says, if someone asks you to go 1 mile, go 2. That's love. See, love does that. If you are struck on the right cheek, give them the left. Love does that, not justice, love. You see, that's a tall order. This is what our bishops are teaching for. Not simply attempting to get us all to go for the minimum, but we have the assurance of this grace of Christ that can actually help us in achieving and even reaching for the heroic. And when that happens, we flourish as persons, we grow in love, we become better citizens by going beyond the law and what it's asking of us in attempting to build up society and do what is good for society. You see what I'm talking about here? So there is really a definite confusion here about the meaning, first of all, of the Magisterium when it speaks to the faithful, and the meaning and the purpose of the government when it speaks to the society, which would include the faithful. It doesn't mean that we don't try to abide by the laws, but when one of the laws possibly requires us to do something that means compromising on the higher life and possibly even destroying that life within us, we get up in arms. Because the life that we are after isn't just the minimum. We're not just after the minimum. We are attempting to live a gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, which calls us all to higher ground, each and every one of us, as we attempt to hear the teaching. Pope John Paul II, that was one of his, that's surely, and even Pope Benedict, how is it possible that these, if you look at it on paper, these are rather old men who are gathering millions of young people? How is that possible? How is that possible? And you know what I really believe it is they believe in you because they believe in Christ at work in you to actually reach for and even attain higher ground. The government, on occasion, in its promulgation of law, the minimum goes below what it was, and we, for example, will start passing out condoms. Already we have given up on you when we give you a condom. You are going to do it anyway, so please, when you do, put this on. That's giving up on the young people. That's giving up. It doesn't really believe there is a resource that could call you to higher ground and even help you to attain it. But see, John Paul II, Pope Benedict, they have a confidence in Christ at work in you to say, we haven't given up on you, we believe you can attain higher ground, get rid of the condoms. You can grow. You can prosper as persons and grow in freedom and begin to make a solid commitment to chastity and begin to really make a wholesome, positive contribution to society. See, this is where the Magisterium's coming from. Not the structure to the minimum, but the call to higher ground and even believing that you can make it and do it and achieve it. And that Christ even is asking this of you. Wow, that's what attracts millions of youth. This guy believes in me because he believes in Christ at work in me. And see, that's the same with our bishops. So when we get back to this particular mandate then of the health and human services, what are they saying? Well, they're basically saying in this mandate, which they have required of us, is that in our health care, in our social services within the church, and across the board within the United States, of whatever faith and whatever society, whatever sector of society, that there has to be mandated funds for contraception, that's the one everyone's talking about, sterilization, and abortion. And for us, these are evils that we believe are contrary to our faith. We believe in our faith, in this higher life that we believe ourselves called to by Jesus, and that the Magisterium witnesses to and attempts to instruct us in, all right, that higher life becomes threatened if you're going to mandate this for us in our lives. And that's where we become concerned, because they're attempting now to overstep the bounds of requirement and law, which is directed to the will, to force a behavior upon us that it wants to extract, namely, pay for abortions, pay for sterilization, and pay for contraception. And we can't. We just can't. And this is where our conscience, our faith conscience, instructs us of the higher ground that Jesus is calling us to, and that our bishops are also attempting to call us to as they instruct us. And so, while I might be able to understand how that could be misinterpreted by someone who's a politician, I have a harder time understanding how that could be misinterpreted by a specifically Catholic politician, and even one that declares herself to be incredibly devout and in love with her faith, because she wants to legislate for us an intrinsic evil like abortion. Now, when we talk about an intrinsic evil, in our conscience, we cannot accept an intrinsic evil. And an intrinsic evil, according to Pope John Paul II in Veritatis Splendor, is an evil that is evil no matter what the circumstances are. That's what an intrinsic evil is. Regardless of the circumstances, an evil that is intrinsic is always evil, and it can never be thought to be a good, or there's no condition, whether it be the poverty or the difficulty, whatever it might be, that might cause or be a consequence of this particular act. It's always going to be an evil. The circumstances can't render that good. That's what an intrinsic evil means. Okay? And we happen to believe in our faith, for example, that abortion is just that. There are no surrounding circumstances to that act of abortion that could ever render it good. Now, see, for example, taking my own life would normally be called suicide. But giving my own life, when some of my buddies and I are, say, in a theater of war, and a hand grenade comes into the area where we're huddled together, and I throw my body on top of that hand grenade, I'm not taking my life, as in the case of suicide. I'm giving my life for my friends. That's different, see? I'm giving my life. I'm not taking my life, as in the case of suicide. And see, abortion is doing that. It's taking a life. It's not giving a life. It's not giving life. It's not giving even the mother's life. It's taking a life. And that's always evil. You see, no matter what the circumstances are surrounding that act, it's harmful. All right. Now, let me just pause here, because I want to now get to the subject, after giving some introduction to the relation of law, gospel, magisterium, state government, the object of their instruction, what they're after. It's different. It's very different. When we talk about conscience in the Catholic Church, I want to quote a very famous text of number 13 in Gaudium et Spes, the Constitution of the Church in the Modern World of the Second Vatican Council, which is a beautiful text. And it says, "Deep within his conscience, man discovers a law which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. In this conscience where we discover this law, this word discover is very important. We do not invent this law. The state creates laws for the good of its citizens. The law that conscience reads is not invented. It's not created by us. It's discovered, see? And it's the law of our very nature as human beings that we are called upon to make judgments about relative to what prospers this human life and what diminishes this human life, based upon this law that we discover within conscience. Sometimes this law is referred to as natural law. For the purposes maybe of this, to make that intelligible without going into, there's whole books written on that, there's treatises in the Summa, there's an awful lot, and risking sounding too simplistic, I'd like to call this natural law that we discover the instruction manual on how to be human. Let me just call it that, okay? If you were to buy, let's say, an electronic device and bring it home, and I would bet that some of us here have actually done this. I know I have. I mean, I have this little electronic device here. It's just this little tablet, and I have never yet read the instruction manual on this tablet. Okay? They say it's supposed to be very intuitive, don't worry about it when you get home. And then you get this thick book, haven't read it yet, okay? There's probably a lot more I could be doing, but I get the basics done, you know? But let's say we had a nuclear power plant down the river here, and I told you, don't worry, we're all safe. It's in the hands of a 7th grader that got a 100 on his physics exam the other day. Would you be consoled? I think we'd all have cause for some concern. We hope that we have people in there that know what they're doing and know how to follow the instruction manual on how to run this plant so we don't have a nuclear meltdown or some kind of nuclear pollution or some kind of a dirty bomb experience that wipes us all out. We hope someone's going to get it right, and we trust that. And I'm grateful that there are people that actually want to study nuclear physics, like Dr. Sish at this university. Thank God for people like that that actually have an interest in that. I have no interest. But see, you've got to be able to follow the instruction manual. Well, it's something analogous to that with ourselves. In our conscience, we discover a law. We discover a law that we do not invent. We do not create it. We do not promulgate it. It is rather, as it says here, laid upon us. And that is, it's written into our very nature, the laws that prosper it and the laws that diminish it. And what we are attempting to do in our conscience is make those judgments relative to goods to be done or evils to be avoided. And that is what conscience performs within our souls. Conscience is the judgment, it's a judgment of practical reason relative to a good to be done or an evil to be avoided. That's all it is. It's not a voice that speaks necessarily in propositions. It's not something that of a voice that comes from heaven and then sort of supplants you as a person, and you just become this automaton that walks around and just begins to act in obedience with this law of this imposed voice on you. No, that's not what it is. You see, conscience is at the very core of our person and indeed of our freedom as persons. And it is in accord with our nature and the laws governing it, the instruction manual, if you will, that is built into it, that we make judgments that prosper this human life as well as yours in my relation to you, or that diminish that human life in myself and in you as my neighbor. And this is why the law of love is so important, because it is something that is definitely promoting human life, my own and yours, when it's operative. Okay? So let me get back. Conscience then is a judgment of practical reason about a good to be done or an evil to be avoided. Now, practical reason, what is that? Well, we only have one power of reason, and most of us have this idea that it's located right up here. And it's in my head, and then the rest of this is just irrational. But that's not really true. There is intelligibility that you can understand from me through my body. My body is communicating to you right now. Like, I'm just so excited about this. I can't wait till we get finished. You know, this is so exciting. Like, right? That's reasonableness being communicated through my body. I can send you a message. Or let's say I just go like this. Oh, boy. And you say, "What's wrong, Father Dan?" I didn't say anything. Right? I mean, there's a message. There's a message going out from this. I mean, and that's not just coming from here. I can make this, I'm speaking, even when I'm not speaking, you see. Well, see, this is the thing. We are reasonable creatures. We are endowed with reason, not just thinking-wise, but even in and through our embodiment, we have intelligible emotions. Why were you so upset the other day? And a lot of times, maybe not always, but sometimes we can actually say, well, you know, this happened, and I was just so upset about that. I know I shouldn't have been, and I apologize, but it really got to me. See, we can render that intelligible, this seemingly irrational emotion in us. Now, practical reason is something that instructs us about very concrete, practical things. For example, when I come up to this podium, practical reason's telling me that it's there and I can lean on it. If I was to walk up to this podium and bump into it and fall over this stage, you might think either I'm clumsy or blind. But see, what keeps me from doing that is my practical reason. It's there, or the door is there, I open the door, or there's some steps, got to step up. All right, that's very practical stuff, and our reason is constantly operating in these judgments. They're so implicit we don't pay attention to them. We go through the door and open it instead of bash into it and crash the glass all over the place. Right? I mean, we take practical reason so for granted. It's implicit in us. Well, see, that is the level at which the judgment of conscience, the judgment of practical reason about a good in my life to be done or an evil in my life to be avoided operates. And we're running up against a lot of them today. A lot of circumstances, occasions that are very challenging, deeds that are made possible by science and its positive advancement, but how we use it sometimes. And so what we need to begin to understand is what are some of the consequences of the judgments we're making relative to things that we are doing? And we're not asking those questions enough when you mandate a law that would require abortion without asking the question, is abortion good for the human or is it evil for the human? Is abortion something that prospers the human or is it something that diminishes the human? Now we're talking a little bit more about speculative reason and attempting to understand what are we doing? What are we doing? Someone who comes on the scene and maybe asks that question might be told, you're asking too many questions. Don't think about it so much. Just do it. Just get it done. Just go in there and do it. Just get it finished. We didn't hire you to question us. Just do it. All right? That's eclipsing your dignity as a human person who has the capacity to think, understand circumstances, and come to judgments about those circumstances, about goods to be done, or maybe an evil to be avoided. See, we have this capacity. This is the faculty then that the Magisterium is teaching us at. It's attempting to help us understand in our world some of the things we're encountering as we come up against them. It's helping us understand not just don't do this, but why. It's helping us understand so that we, as we come upon the very particular circumstances in our life of moral dilemmas, which the church just can't in advance specify, but the church is helping us understand these things so that when we do come upon those particulars in our lives, we can hopefully make good judgments. Judgments that prosper the human, that are in keeping with the law that is written on our hearts, the instruction manual, that it's one life to give and that's my own, and no life to take. That's not mine to do, ever. I have only one life to give, and that's my own life. And it's not mine to take anyone else's life. See, that's a judgment that the church makes when she considers the gospel in the light of these social problems that we're facing. I cannot take the life of a child. It's not mine to take. I can't even take my own life. I can only give one life, and when I do, it's my own. You see, that is where we come into then understanding some of these things that we're doing. Whereas when the government comes on the scene and mandates this particular act, that it be paid for the health and well-being of the mother, we come on the scene and we say, you know what, really for the health and well-being of the mother, you might want to rethink this. No, do it. See, that's what law is doing. It's speaking to our will, not to our reason. Just do it. You're required, or there'll be penalties. Just do it. And the church is coming in and saying, well, you know, for the health and well-being of the mother, really, I don't think you want to do that. And if you force us to do that, guess what? We're not going to be able to do that. We'll have to close down our insurance. We won't be able to offer insurance if that's what we have to pay for, because we can't diminish life. That's not what Jesus sent us to do. See, it's that higher calling, and we're understanding this. We understand this in a way that the government doesn't. It's just mandating a particular behavior that it wants, and as such, it's going against the judgments, at least in this case, for this audience, that are against our faith. and the judgments of our conscience, and our understanding of these issues and these deeds that they're trying to make us pay for. Okay? And that's where we talk about the violation of conscience. Conscience, if an abortion comes up in my judgment according to my understanding that I cannot take a life because it's not mine to take, and then you say you're going to force me to pay for that, that is what we call a violation of conscience. You are mandating a behavior that is contrary to the judgment of my conscience, which is, I can't take a life, and I can't pay for someone else to take a life. Because if I pay for that person to take a life, I'm complicit in taking someone's life that isn't mine to take. That's a judgment of conscience. See, that's a judgment at a very practical level that we operate at as human beings, that we believe when we become complicit or the actual perpetrators of that act, we end up diminishing ourselves, diminishing our neighbor, diminishing our society, bringing the whole thing down a notch instead of bringing it up a notch, you see. And that's what's at stake here. It's a higher calling. And so now, let me just, in concluding, tell you what I've just said. What I've just said is, in this talk, I wanted to talk more about conscience than freedom on the one side and, let's say, the specific contraception, abortion, sterilization on the other. Those are very important issues. What I wanted to talk about here is the inner sanctuary where we are making judgments about goods to be done, evils to be avoided. And that is an inner sanctuary where we are alone with God, where we will be judged by God on the judgments we've made and the deeds that we have brought into action, and that is a personal inner sanctuary of the human person that cannot be violated. And it's following a law that is not created, but discovered. That's very important because that makes it's not arbitrary what prospers us as human beings. It's common to all of us. It's a law that is laid upon us, the instruction manual of our nature that we are able to discover through reason and understand that when I do this particular act as a good, I am prospering this human being, I am prospering you as human beings, and that's a good. And I become morally upright, wholesome, a contributing member to society, and this is all good. But when you come and you want to mandate to me a deed that I understand and that my judgment has arrived at as being an evil, I understand myself to be diminished while diminishing others around me and bringing the whole of this society down a notch. And honestly, when it comes right down to it, what our bishops are trying to say to us is we want to go for higher ground. And so follow your conscience. And don't let the law intimidate you into thinking that you have to do what is contrary to that judgment of conscience relative to a good to be done, or in this case, an evil to be avoided. Thank you very much.